Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I'll be showing you how you can make a short, and I mean a short that actually fits. So you can see that from the fitting of mine here. So if this video is what you'd like to see, please make sure you keep on watching. So we're going to start with the pattern drafting process first, and to begin, what I did was to mark 1 inch from the edge of my paper like this, and this will serve as the basis for all my vertical measurements. I also went ahead to mark 1 inch also from the side of my paper, and that will serve as the basis for all my horizontal measurements. So I went ahead to square up the 2 points together like this. And because my short has a band of 2 inches, so I placed that 2 inches right there at the starting point, and I marked the length of my short, which was 20 inches. So yours can be longer or it can be shorter. So I just decided to go with 20 inches for this tutorial. So I squared that line up right there. And after that, what I did again was to place that 2 inches again on my starting point. And I marked my waist to hip measurement, which is 10 inches. So that is it there. And then I took 14 inches to be my crouch line, because if I divide my hip measurement by 3, 42 divided by 3, I have a total of 14 inches. So that is my crouch line for this short. So I squared the 2 points together like so. So this is my hip line, this is my crouch line, and this is my short line. So moving on, I'm going to start by placing a quarter of my hip circumference on my hip line, which is 10.5. 42 divided by 4 is 10.5. So I also mark that at my crouch line, and I'll also mark the same thing at my waistline. So here is my waistline, and I'm just going to connect these 3 points together to form a straight line. So next thing I did was on my crouch line, I made an extension of 2 inches. So this will be my crouch extension. So for you to get yours, please divide your hip measurement by 20. At this point, I would go inwards by 1/2 inch. This is so as to eliminate unnecessary folds or wrinkles at the front of the trouser. So I'm going to connect that point back into my hip line. And to create the crouch curve, I placed my ruler this way and connected this point all the way to my hip line like this. And the crouch curve for the front has been formed. So next thing I'm going to do is that from here, I'm going to mark a quarter of my waist circumference. 32 divided by 4 is 8 inches. So I have marked that, and I'm going to connect that point into my hip line with the curved part of my ruler. At this point, if you want your short to have a dart at the waistline, you can go ahead and mark your 1 inch for your dart allowance at that point and connect it into your hip line. But I didn't do that because I didn't put a dart in mine. So now I just created the inseam line by connecting my short line to my crouch line like this. And then from here, I would come downwards by 1 inch. And I'm just going to reconnect that point back into my waistline. So the reason for doing this is so that when the short is worn, it balances properly on the waistline. So this happens to be the front part of the short. You can see the whole drafting process was fast and easy. Now to create the back pattern, I'm going to just cut out a piece of my pattern paper from the front, and then I'll attach it at the upper part around the waistline area of the short, because I need to create the back rise for the back pattern. So with my red marker, I'll be creating the pattern for the back. So I'm going to start right here. Okay, so from this point, I'm going to come inwards by 2 inches. This is the method I am using to create my back pattern. So at that point where I marked 2 inches, okay, I'm going to go upwards by 1.5 inches. This will serve as the back rise for the short, so that when I sit down, the short properly covers my back. So at my crouch length line here, I'm going to come inwards by 1 inch. So the next thing I did was to connect these 2 points right here, the back rise and the back crotch point. I'm going to connect them together in a straight line like this. And remember that the crotch extension for the front was 2 inches. Now the back has to be times 2 of that, making a total of 4. So from this point where I went inwards by 1 inch at the crouch line, I would begin to mark my 4-inch extension for the back crouch. So this is where it will end. So I'm just going to extend that point like this. So after doing that, I'm going to create the back crouch curve by placing my ruler this way and connecting it to my hip line. And I'm just going back in to blend the line between my back rise and my hip line. So the next thing to do is that at this point here, I'm going to mark 1/4 of my waist circumference, which will be 8 inches. So I'm going to make sure that whatever I get has to be on this point where my front waistline is. So you have to make sure that it is on that point so that the waistline between the front and the back matches up. So I'm going to connect it this way. And this line that I just created now becomes the waistline for the back pattern. After doing that, I'm going to measure what I have between my front hip line and back hip line at this point. So what I have in that space was about 1.25 inches. Now, I would go to this point here, which is also my hip line, and I would replace it right there. So I want to create the waist to hip curve of the back at that point. So whatever you have, please make sure you replace it at exactly that point. So now that we are done with our part, the back is supposed to be bigger than the front. So at this point, at my short length, I added 1/2 inch on both sides of the pattern, okay? And after that, from my hip line, I just made a straight connection down to that point and also created the inseam line area of the back like this. And so guys, the back pattern is basically ready. So I'm just going to trace out all those red markings that I made on my front pattern. I'm going to transfer it onto a fresh pattern paper. Okay, so remember that the black marker was used to draft the front while the red marker was used to draft the back. So I'm just going ahead to transfer all the markings that I need for the back pattern onto my fresh pattern paper. So I wanted to mention that the tool that I'm currently using is called the tracing wheel. So if you haven't seen it before, it is called a tracing wheel. And as the name implies, it is used to transfer markings onto another paper. So guys, after tracing, I'm just going ahead to mark out all the points that I transferred. So you can't clearly see the markings, but my marker would definitely bring everything out in place. So this is definitely one thing I like about pattern drafting. It is so interesting. So I'm just going ahead to label out the lines accordingly, and this happens to be the back pattern of the shorts. So what I did next was to add a hem allowance of 1.5 inches. So you can wait to do this while you're transferring your pattern to fabric, but I just decided to do mine at this point. And then at this scratch curve area of the back, I added 1 inch to that point. So the reason why I added 1 inch is because, first of all, this area is the center back, and this 1 inch would also serve as a zipper allowance of the back. Now to the inseam area, I added 1 inch, so yours can be 1/2 inch if you decide, but I just made mine 1 inch for this tutorial. So guys, remember that my hem allowance, which is HA, is 1.5 inches. My inseam allowance is 1 inch. My zipper allowance is 1 inch. So the allowance at the waistline was 1/2 inch because that is the standard allowance. You don't need so much allowance at this point. So the allowance I added is a 0.5 inch allowance. And to my side back, which is supposed to be my side seam area, my paper wasn't enough, but later on I would make that correction and add the 1 inch allowance to the side. I'm going to repeat the same thing at the front pattern. I am going to use my black marker to add my 1.5 inches, which will be the hem allowance, which has to correspond with the back pattern, of course. So remember that this is where the front crouch curve is. So to this point, I added a 0.5 inch seam allowance because that is the front. You don't need much allowance there. But to the inseam area, I added 1 inch so that it matches up with that of the back. And I just went ahead to connect the points together like this. So next thing I did was to add half an inch to the waistline of the front. Please don't get confused because of the markers. Remember that the black marker is for the front. So I also added 1 inch to the side seam of the front, just like I did for the back. So I'm just going ahead to connect the points that I made for the front side seam allowance. Now I'm just going ahead to cut out my front pattern because I am done with all the necessary allowances. So remember that my allowance for the hem is 1.5 inches. The side seam is 1 inch. The inseam is also 1 inch, while this crouch area is 0.5 inches, which is the same with that of the waistline. So the next thing I did was to cut out the back pattern like I did for the front. So I am done cutting out the back pattern. So I'm just adding extra pattern paper to the side area of the back pattern so that I can go ahead and add up my side seam allowance, which is 1 inch. So if your side seam allowance for the front was half an inch, please make sure you also add half an inch to that of the back, because you don't want your side seam to not match up at all when you want to join the front and back together. So after adding my side seam allowance, I'm just going back in to use my marker to just mark out the initial line that was there before the side seam allowance. And that is my side back with the 1 inch seam allowance. And the pattern is ready, guys. It is as simple as A, B, C, and D. So the next step is to basically transfer my patterns to my fabric. So my fabric is Ankara, and I cut out 2 pieces of my front and also 2 pieces of my back. So this is the pattern, okay, so you can know which is front and which is back. So now I'm just going to start with the front. I'm going to be joining the crotch area of the front together by the half-inch seam allowance that I added all the way to this point here. So I have joined it, as you can see. Next thing I'm going to do is that I would fold this, my front short, into 2 like this, and I'm going to measure what I have on the waistline. So what I have on a fold now is 9 inches. So for the waistband, I've already cut it out, and the length of my waistband is 9 inches, while the width of the waistband is 2.5. So the extra half an inch is seam allowance to sew the waistband. So I also made sure to iron interfacing so as to stabilize my fabric, and what I have right there is 5 inches, so I have 2.5 inches on the fold. So for the back, just like the front, I would measure the waistline. I had 10 inches, so I have cut out my waistband already, and the length is 10 inches and the width is 2.5 inches, just like the front. So the half an inch is the seam allowance for the waistband, and I have 2 pieces of my back waistband while the front was on a fold. So I also stabilized my waistband with my interfacing, and what I have there is 5 inches, so it is the same as the front. So now I'm going to place my front waistband onto the waistline of the short like this, and I'm going to sew them together by half an inch. So I'll also be sewing the back waistband to the waistline of the short by half an inch. So I would place it like this and sew by half an inch, and essentially repeat the same thing on the other one. I'm going to place it like this, and I'm going to sew by half an inch. So I have sewn the front waistband and the shorts together, and I also did the same thing with the back. So this is the first piece of the back, and here is the second piece of the back. So next thing I did was to place the 2 back pieces together like this along the crotch area, making sure that they are equal starting from the waistband. And from my waistband, I measured my waist to hip measurement, which is 10 inches. And from that 10 inches, I'm going to be sewing by the 1 inch seam allowance that I added along this point, and I'm going to stop right here. So I have made the stitch. I hope you can see that. And now the remaining opening we have here, is to attach the zipper, just like you would on your skirt. So here's my black zipper. So I'm going to place the zipper right onto the 1-inch allowance that I have here, and I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew from here all the way to this other side like this, making sure that everything is sewn on a 1-inch seam allowance. So after sewing the zipper onto the back, I place the front and back together like this, and I'll be joining the inseam area of the front and back together like this. So starting from this point here, I'm going to sew by 1 inch all the way to this other side. So the inseam area has been sewn together. So next thing we're going to do is to join the sides of the front and back together. So remember that my side seam allowance is 1 inch. So from the waistband, I would sew by 1 inch till I get to the hem. And I'll repeat the same thing on the other side. So I would sew the side by 1 inch all the way to the hem of the short. After sewing the sides, I went ahead to hem the short by my 1.5 inch hem allowance, and this is the final look of the short. Please, if you like this video, please don't forget to hit the like button, turn on post notification, and please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And that is all I have for you guys for this tutorial. I will see you all in my next video. Bye.